Biology Unit 1 webinar for fall of 2023. Shout out to my BSD colleagues who have just come off our first day with kids. So welcome. Just want to very quickly, I know that we want to get to the content as quickly as we can. I just want to point out that if you are accessing Patterns Biology materials, you want to make sure that you are accessing them through Google shared drives. If you do not have access to these shared drives, you might have some trouble getting to some documents today. If that's the case, please just be patient and we will help you get to access to them at the end of the webinar today. Any student-facing files you should be able to see regardless, but we will help resolve that, any problems that you may have at the end of the webinar today. If you can mute yourselves, that would be really helpful. You can have your camera on if you wish, but it would be helpful if you can mute. I'm hearing some feedback out of microphones. Okay, Jason, go ahead. So quickly to get us going, I did put the link to the slides again in the chat, and I'm going to put in the link to our Mentimeter just to get an idea about what people are looking forward to in this school year. I know some of you are in your pre-service week. I just mentioned that we just had our first day with students today. Well, ninth graders were there yesterday, but I'm not having ninth graders this year. So go ahead and click on that Mentimeter and tell us up to 3 words of things that you are looking forward to for this year. And then while you guys are doing that, we will do our quick introductions. I did put the link in the chat. You can go to menti.com and put in that code, but we also put the link in the chat. I'll put it in one more time. So my name is Charlotte Denis. I teach in Beaverton School District at Mountainside High School. This year I'll be teaching patterns biology and patterns chemistry, but I've taught patterns physics in the past as well. And I am on the Biology Council, and that is a group of people who work to develop and enhance and update the patterns biology curriculum. And I have also been a summer course instructor, summer workshop instructor with Portland Metro STEM Partnership since 2017.
Yeah, and I'm Jason Baca. I work in Hillsborough School District at Century High School. We are on our PD week, so we do not have kids this week. I teach this year. I'm going to be teaching biology, AP biology, and AVID. I am fairly new to the council, but I have taught chemistry patterns, physics patterns, and also obviously bio patterns. And I've been teaching since 2000. Long time.
I'm Lori Hunt. I've had no training, and I am joining you now to get some training because I am teaching NGSS biology starting next week.
All right, well, welcome, Lori, and everybody else. I don't think we're going to have time to appreciate you, Lori, but we're not going to have time for everybody to introduce themselves, I think. We have about 40 people who are registered for our webinar today. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, on the other hand, you're welcome to do that. Please go ahead and do that. I'm going to one more time put the link to our Mentimeter in for those people who have just joined us. And then also a link to my second screen is not doing well.
I like that somebody is looking forward to vacations in the 2023-24 school year. Yeah, we also did the no phones thing, so we're going to see how that goes.
Yes, I will say I am amazed at how well that worked. I had only one minor issue and was able to resolve that today. So resolve it easily. So I was really surprised. Yeah, first day honeymoon phase, right? We are doing the phones in the organizational, looks like a shoe rack thing. That is what we are doing this year. So yeah, new field trips, connections, no phones, relationships. Awesome. Great. And we will keep adding to that, and we will take whatever we get at the end and we will paste that into our slides.
And it's bigger, right? What's if they've done it more than once?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think so. Great. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So again, if you have the slides open, or if you don't have the slides open, if you want to be able to click on links, I just put the link into the chat again, and you can get access to that Mentimeter to be able to add what you are looking forward to for this school year. Just as a quick reminder, many of you are repeat customers with respect to Patterns webinars, but if you are a teacher in Oregon, you are eligible for $50 an hour to attend this webinar. And your attendance today is going to be tracked in a couple of ways. So keep an eye on the chat. Susan Holbeck is here from Portland Metro STEM Partnership. She's going to be sending out a Google form link in the chat for you to confirm your attendance. So please make sure that you're keeping an eye on the chat for that link to come through. The payment comes from Portland State. So if you have questions about any of those or any of the paying through the RAP grant, Susan Holbeck is your point of contact. Susan just put the Google form into the chat. So hopefully all of you who are here can go ahead and fill that out so she has an accurate tracking of attendance. All right. Jason, you want to go ahead? There we go. Quick agenda check-in. Today we are going to be overviewing Patterns Biology Unit 1, which is titled Biodiversity and Ecosystems. And then we will be talking as we go. I put it as a separate item on the agenda, but it's really not a separate item. We'll be talking about as we go assessment opportunities in this unit, because there are quite a few and lots of variations on how you might do that. And then I will also say that if you have questions during our time together today, feel free to put those questions into the chat. There are two of us here. We're going to be tag teaming and answering your questions, hopefully in the moment as we go. We will make, of course, every effort to answer those questions in real time. But we do have a parking lot, or you can, if you have something that's a little bit longer term that you want us to take a look at, we'll check in with the parking lot at the end in case there are any unanswered questions there. But the chat's probably going to be your best bet. Or if you would like to, certainly if you would like to unmute and ask your question out loud, we welcome you to do that. So we will request, however, that if you're not speaking, that you remain muted. It just, with this many people, the feedback sometimes is quite audible, and we are recording. So if you could remain muted when you're not speaking, that would be very helpful. Non-pressing questions can be posted in the chat. Certainly you can unmute if you have a question you'd like to say out loud, and we'd appreciate it if you could limit your distractions. If the recording is going, Susan turned that on a little bit ago, you're certainly, if you have your video on and you'd prefer to have your video off, you're welcome to do that. The recording only records the speaker.
We're definitely going to stop at the end of each of these sections to kind of give you a chance to ask those questions. So make sure you have some.
All right, so I'm going to put one more time in here the link to the slides so that everybody can have access to those. The links, all the links in that we will be using, you should have access to here in the slides. And we'll be referring to the Unit 1 outline regularly, and that is a document I think that many of you are familiar with. It is a kind of an overview of the whole unit. And then the other document that we will be referring to relatively regularly is the Unit 1 Interactive Notebook, also known as the INB. I know that that's something that I use relatively regularly, or not relatively regularly. We're using it almost every day. And so we'll refer to that document as well. If you would like to see either of those, you can click on those links and check out what we're talking about there. All right, so in this unit, no, and if this is your first time at a webinar, I'll just say that the format here is we're relatively loose, but we do have a fair bit of information that we want to make sure that we get through in our time together. It's 4:11, so I know that in the past we've had some feedback about getting to the point quicker, so I tried to do that. I got there in 11 minutes today. When we are looking at the whole unit, we want to make sure that we're looking at the essential question and demonstrating to you how the pieces of the unit fit together to actually help students answer this essential question. This is actually one of the reasons I like to use the interactive notebook, because the interactive notebook prompts the students to come back to the essential question, both for each lesson on the lesson level as well as for the unit. And so we want to make sure that we're hitting the essential question and trying to make connections back to that at the level of each lesson. Emily, I see your message there in the chat. When we switch off and Jason takes over, I will answer your question.
Perfect.
So in this unit, we are looking at 4 different NGSS performance expectations. And as we go through the unit, we will identify which of the PEs are addressed in each lesson. We're going to go ahead and get started. Jason's going to tell you about things at the beginning of the unit.
Yeah, so as somebody has taught all 3, so I have taught physics, chemistry, and bio, this is sort of one of those arcing things that goes between all 3, which is the claim, evidence, reasoning. I'm sure this is not the first time you have seen this, but the basic idea is that when you make a claim, you need to have evidence that supports it. So the first activity that utilizes this is the map activity, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But we live sort of in a world where we have a lot of our students that can make claims however they'd like, and there doesn't need to be evidence of any sort. They can just say, I am this or whatever. I mean, Instagram is full of them, and so is Twitter and everywhere else. But the idea that the claim needs evidence to support it is kind of big throughout the entire deal. And so the first activity we do is something called map investigation. And the first claim that I make to my kids is that the Portland metro area has changed in the last 40 years. If you are from a place that is not the Portland metro area, your place in Oregon is probably also represented. So you would just kind of change it to say that. So we use something called time lapse, and I'm not going to click on time lapse, but you can kind of take a look at it later. It's basically they take a satellite image of every year and they put it on top of each other so that it kind of creates this sort of slideshow of what it looked like 40 years ago. So where I'm currently sitting at Century High School, 1997 was the year that our building was built, or I guess it was built in 96, it opened in 97. And so I show students in 1984 what it looked like, and there was not much here. I remember as a kid actually riding through where our school is located currently. And so that time lapse is used to show that the urban area has increased and the rural area has gone down. And so the reason we do that is to sort of show, I just made a claim. I said that there are way more people here, and that's kind of the next piece, right? There are more people in this area than there has ever been. And because of that, there are more buildings and there are more places where people live and less farmland. And so this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is from time lapse, and we take these maps and we put the grids on them, and the students figure out approximately how much area is rural versus urban in 1984. So this actually is where Century currently is, but it is not on this map. And then we kind of move forward and you can see things are starting to develop, and the kids notice pretty quickly that these white things here are the roofs of commercial buildings, and all of these sort of darker ones are going to be the houses. And then all of this stuff, obviously the green and the brown, are going to be farmland. And then here's 2016, even more so. And I think they just added 2020, I think is on here now on time lapse. And so the basic idea is that over time we have increased. So we have increased in population and we have increased in urban land cover. So you can kind of see here, all three of these graphs are going to show the same thing, whether it's Beaverton, Hillsborough, or Clackamas. The students look at, I think there's 6 or so maps that they look at. And then obviously you would tailor it to wherever you are located in Oregon or outside of Oregon.
If you had to guess, go back one slide just for a sec. If you had to guess, what do you think the major misconception that students come out of looking at this graph with? Now, there are 2 versions of this task. One is where they actually do the counting themselves and generate their own graph. And then there's another version that's a little bit shorter, which is the one I use, where the counting has already been done. And then they analyze the graph and they look at individual locations. But we summarize with this graph. And I'm curious what you all think the major misconception that students come away with might be. Feel free to put it in the chat or speak if you're willing to put yourself out there.
No brave souls.
No brave souls. There we go. Thanks, Doug. Knew I could count on y'all from Westview. Thank you. Yeah, so that Doug explains exactly what I observe with my students most of the time, that they assume that because the blue line's crossing what we're, it's not actually the y-axis, but is crossing higher on in 1984, that they assume that the rate of increase is higher. But in fact, the rate of increase is shown, of course, here by the slope of the line. And these 3 lines are actually all almost parallel to each other. And so the rate of increase in each of these locations is just about the same. The only difference is that in 1984, Beaverton had a larger starting value of urban area. So Beaverton was larger in 1984, more urbanized than Hillsborough or Clackamas was at that same time. So that's a very common misunderstanding that students have, but it's a good thing for them to come back to. It's how to read a linear graph. What does the y-intercept, or what we perceive here to be the y-intercept? It's not actually the y-intercept, right? Because we're not talking about year 0. The earliest year we're talking about here is 1984. So thanks, Doug. You're right on the money. Susan, if you could post the link to your Google form again, that would be helpful. Maybe you did that already. Okay, so any questions before we move on to 1-2? Any questions about the map investigation? We do have it set up for multiple locations, 6 locations. And I have a colleague who has taken on, she would really like to get the newest version of the maps. Google recently put out time-lapse images all the way up to 2022. So potentially look for updates coming for those over the course of this year. I have a colleague who's taken that on. Any questions about 1.1?
Question. When I taught this in LC, which is out in the Coast Range, they wanted to see what the difference was in their neighborhood. And I didn't want to show them that initially. One of the things that is actually more pronounced and actually shows them, kind of gives them the panic moment, is show them Las Vegas. Punch in Las Vegas zip code and watch what happens to Lake Mead in the lower right-hand corner. And then pull back and find a town in the Coast Range. And you'll notice one thing about the Coast Range is that all those places that were cut are now green. So there's a nice little compare and contrast between suburban Portland, the craziness that is Vegas and the Coast Range. It's worth spending the extra 5 minutes, I think.
Yeah, I just did that for Las Vegas as you were talking, Skip, and that is really quite unbelievable almost. So thanks for that. That's a good thing to put it. We'll put that in the notes as a suggestion. Thanks.
Type in 97324 and watch how all the clear cuts and all the harvest has turned green since 1984. It's fun to watch.
Cool.
Hey, Skip.
Yeah, neat. I'm doing that right now.
Because we had a few weeks ago, we had some more rural areas of the Portland, I guess it's not Portland Metro, but of Oregon, where they actually were staying pretty steady, and it even looked like they were losing rural area, which was kind of strange. Was that, I think it was Moppin.
Mm.
He was mentioning that it kind of went down.
Yeah. Well, population has also gone down there, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does happen. You could
Yeah.
be shown that your claim was not in fact correct, but that's how it works.
Depending on where you're, depending on what area you're looking at.
Mhm.
All right. Good. So I like to do that almost at the very first or second day of school to show that students that we can do science right away. We don't have to, I mean, and we can work to collaborate. There are collaboration systems built into that lesson for students to actually be working and talking together and analyzing together. So I will be doing that probably on Thursday and Friday this week. So from that point, we move on into kind of the meat of the, we've sort of established our phenomenon, which is that the Portland metro area is becoming increasingly urbanized. And now we have to set the stage to answer the question that we are trying to answer for the unit about biodiversity. So there are a series of tasks that we suggest for students to do around introduction to biodiversity. And one of the things that they do is that they look at an article from Vox, and I linked the article in this case to the image that's on this slide. And it is an article that is called All of the Life on Earth in One Amazing Chart, or something like that. And you can see that there's a picture there, and it shows all of the value of the gigatons of carbon that are represented by each of the 6 kingdoms. And when you get to the animals, it also breaks it down by group. And I like this one because it actually calls out the arthropods as as a very large fraction, I think, or maybe the largest fraction weight by gigatons of carbon. And so since we're going to investigate arthropods later in the unit, I really like to be able to point out arthropods early. And so they make a prediction. So we practice the scientific practices of asking questions and making predictions. They guess which of the kingdoms they think is going to be heaviest in terms of carbon. And then they go back and revise their prediction after looking at the image. They don't actually ever read the article. They just look at the pictures that are in the article. It's a nice intro into some data. And then there is a video that came from the California Academy of Sciences called Biodiversity, Ecosystems, and Ecological Networks. And I really like this video because it gives a lot of really salient analogies for how biodiversity causes an ecosystem to be healthier than if the biodiversity is smaller, the health of that ecosystem declines. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the next part of that lesson, which is the tribal history, shared history lesson. So in 2017, I think many of you, some of you have known since 2017 or earlier. But in 2017, Oregon Department of Education started to work with the federally recognized tribes of Oregon to create lessons across the curriculum. And these lessons were rolled out in 2020 while most of us were teaching online. And So your district's implementation of tribal history, shared history, which is also, by the way, used to be called SB 13. That was the bill in Salem that that approved this program. And so there are a variety of different kinds of things that are incorporated in the lessons. And in science at the high school level, there are 4 lessons currently, and 3 of them have been incorporated into the patterns biology curriculum. This one that we're talking about here is in our introduction to biodiversity lesson, or into that task. And then there's one in unit 4 about food sovereignty, and one in unit 6 about land management. And so we have incorporated the original materials and connected them to the bigger picture unit plan for each of those units. We will not talk about unit 4 or unit 6 today. That's for later on in the year. But we wanted to tell you or share with you about what the introduction to biodiversity lesson includes in unit 1. So I think, Jason, you can go to the next slide. So in this particular lesson, the lesson is called Ecosystems and Seasonal Rounds, and it differentiates between an ecosystem versus an ecoregion, and introduces the idea of a seasonal round, which is sort of the order of harvest that Indigenous peoples used in their ecoregion to make sure that they had access to a wide variety of different foods. And then this particular lesson also discusses the effects of forced relocation on seasonal rounds. And so it asks students to really consider what must have happened when Indigenous peoples were removed from their lands and put into a new location where they may not have been in the same ecoregion, therefore not in the same ecosystem, therefore no access to the foods that they had always had access to. If you are new to tribal history, shared history, there's some recommended reading for you that we've linked there. The first one is a document, and then the second link there, Critical Orientations, is a multi-phase professional development that you can do. It is all online, it's self-paced. We encourage you, if you're not familiar with that, to engage in that PD.
All right. And so I know in Hillsborough, we actually have a department that kind of helps us roll out those lessons. So we actually had training through our district. Started with us, and then I think it went to social studies and everybody else. This is 1.3. So 1.3 is about biodiversity. And so biodiversity is looking at, in this case, arthropods. So insects and spiders and some worms and other things that kind of fit within that as well. The kids are basically going out into the environment and they are collecting insects or these other arthropods, and they're trying to figure out if the biodiversity of the area has declined. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm at Century High School. When this building was built, the parking lot is on a sort of it's on an invert. So what happens is all of the oils and things off people's cars go down into this little creek that we have behind, which is where I take my students out to do biodiversity. Charlotte actually went out with us a few weeks ago when we were kind of looking at that area. But the biodiversity of that area was declining. And so we had some data because we were doing this that sort of showed that the biodiversity was getting worse and worse every year as those cars continued to put oil and other things into the environment. One thing that was kind of nice is that Clearwater Services kind of got wind of what we were doing, and they started putting some things. Yeah, well, I'll explain that in just a second, Emily. They showed how they could add plants and other things to actually increase that biodiversity. So in the last 2 years, when we were doing this lab, the biodiversity has been going up, which is really quite, amazing how that's all working. And so we can kind of talk about how that all works. So how they collect the insects is they are given these little boxes. So they are basically boxes from Trader Joe's, and they have mesh at the bottom. And they shake these boxes when they take material. Leaf litter is what they're grabbing. So they grab leaf litter. So off of the trees, these leaves fall, and then underneath the bushes and things, they collect these leaves, and they pick two locations, or most of the time, two different locations that have a different variable. So maybe close to the path versus not close to the path, or close to a water source, not close to a water source. And then they try to see, is there any sort of impact of that biodiversity by being closer to, the path, which would be where people are walking up and down, versus more of a naturey spot that's further away from the path. And so they take these leaves, they put them into a box, they sift them into a pillowcase, and then they bring these arthropods into the classroom, and they look at them underneath a microscope to try to identify them. And so all of these are going to be, and you can see down here, we did this for every single unit. They are teacher notes. These teacher notes will show you kind of how to do this. My students use little microscope cameras, so they can take pictures actually out in the field or in the classroom. Either way, they don't have to drag a huge dissecting scope out to the field. New this year.
You want to open up the teacher notes so that people can see with that. Emily, I think that a lot of your questions, there are a lot of details that can be answered with the teacher notes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can see here at the top, we have the biodiversity slides that we take through our kids, and these ones are specific to the Tualatin Valley. So again, if you are not in the Tualatin Valley, you might want to kind of look at that. This is what I was talking about. These are those boxes that have mesh at the bottom. I know Charlotte goes to Trader Joe's, tells them, please save me some boxes, and they do for her. And then she kind of just puts the sifters. And how long do they last? Like 2 years for you?
Yeah, 2 to 3 years. It depends on how quickly we can get out. I really like to go on this excursion with students like second to last week of September or last week of September. If you get out there after it's rained, they don't last nearly as long. And Jason, could you actually make it 150% so we can see a little better?
Yeah.
There you go. Thanks.
So I'm a little extra. I actually have recycling bins that I have turned into these sifters. That's why I was asking Charlotte about her sifters. I just kind of wanted to keep them for a longer period of time. So it's just kind of how it works out. And you can see down here, we have those pillowcases. The pillowcases either have some sort of label, as you can see here, or you can put a label into them. And this is the bucket that you are going to put your pillowcase in, sort of like it's a garbage bag. And that's where all the dirt goes. So this last year, we created a no-kill version, because the major way that this is done, or the main way this is done, is they pour them out onto their table, and then they collect them, put them in alcohol, and then take pictures of them after they've been put into 70% rubbing alcohol. But in the last year, we had some concerns, and so those concerns have been met with a different way to do it. So my kids have the option of using the microscope cameras to take pictures of live bugs and then take them back outside when they are done taking their photos.
One side note about this task, if you're going to any location that is not a school district location, you do need to make sure that you are communicating with whoever the owner of that property is. I know where I go is owned by Tualatin Hills, or managed by Tualatin Hills. It's public property, but managed by Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation. And I have to file a request for a research permit every year. So I have a very good relationship with our THPRD trail managers and trail supervisors, and have never had a problem being approved. But it is really important, especially if your students might be going off trail, which is what my students are often doing. They might select a variable that is, with respect to trail distance, as in Jason's example, or for which the trail in that area might not lead to the proper location for their collection of their arthropods. And I just really encourage you to be in contact with your with whoever is the owner or manager of the area where you intend to go.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of mentioning about Clearwater Services. They knew what we were doing, and as a result, they did some things to increase the biodiversity, which has been a mutual beneficial sort of thing. And the kids see that there are real scientists that are doing things, you know, around the area, which I think is fantastic. And Emily, to your point, yes, they do sometimes, and you get the best screams when they put them in there, and then not from the insects, but from the kids, as those parasites fly off of them. It's pretty disgusting and cool, in my opinion.
I've been implementing this lab for about 5 years now, and I'm at the point Mountainside's a relatively new school. And when I was even just talking about this with brand new students today, I may have had an older sibling in this school, and some kids even said, "Oh, this is the class where we get to do the bug thing." Some kids have a really very good memory of this experience. I like it. I don't necessarily evaluate it for the quality of the science per se, but I actually like to evaluate this lab for, Jason, could you go back a couple slides? For the procedure writing. Those of you who have been teaching long enough to remember the SIM and the CAM, procedure writing always is the most difficult part, right? And so that's what I have students, what I assess students on in this particular lab. And this year, we've been talking in our team about allowing students an opportunity to demonstrate their procedure in a different way other than writing it, either by doing some kind of video or some other format. I'm really expecting you to be.
It's also really good for teaching kids about the variables versus the controls and how to make sure that you have all of these controls in place. You know, we kind of talk about, like, if you take 5 handfuls of something and put it into one, and then 1 handful into another, are you really staying constant? Are you sifting? If you sift for 3 minutes and then the next time you only sift for a minute, is that equal? You know, is it constant?
Other questions or comments about biodiversity inquiry? It's a lot. There's a lot in the documents. We're a little bit wary about the time. We've not done a webinar of this about this whole unit since CDL, so we're kind of trying to figure out the right balance between how much detail to provide and also to make sure that we can reach all of our targets. But certainly if you have questions, please put them in the chat or speak up.
Yeah, this is one of the ones, as Charlotte already mentioned, that you need to make sure that you contact your health office and tell them that you are going outside. And they're going to give you a list of all the kids that have different needs. Here in Hillsborough, we actually have to be trained in, you know, glucagon and EpiPen and all of those other things. EpiPen especially, because EpiPen, you know, there are things that could sting you. I had a kid stung by a bee. Luckily, they were not allergic, but I had already told the office that it was happening. And then their parents can also make the decision. The parents have to sign a little thing that says that they're allowed to go outside, you know, because you don't want that kid that is allergic to bees to get stung by a bee on your watch. So
we do have where Jason goes and where I go happen to be within walking distance from school, but I have also successfully implemented this as an offsite field trip. If you're looking for funds to help you pay for an offsite excursion, you can go to Oregon Forest Resources Initiative, which I think is oregonforests.org. I'm going to put that into the chat. And OFRI, I think that's the right website. Kind of doing it from off the top of my head, but they have funds available to help school districts and teachers pay for transportation specifically for this kind of event. And I have also successfully gotten funds from them to fund this type of task. So we know that some districts are implementing water-based biodiversity studies. Those are not part right now of the patterns biology curriculum. We have a couple of people in North Clackamas School District who have a university partnership, and we're hoping to be able to get that in also this year or perhaps next year.
There's also people that are living in places where it's a little bit more deserty that bring in leaf litter because they have none nearby their school or even, within a bus ride.
But it is a great opportunity if you can to do a place-based investigation. Now this task takes, 5 or 6 class periods in total, and just think that it's important to just note that when you're teaching in a patterns way and you are teaching using some of these tasks that we suggest as part of the patterns biology curriculum, there are sacrifices that have to be made, right? There are some tasks that are lengthy, but we like to think that the engagement that students are able to the level of engagement that students achieve and the types of things that they are able to do and actually practice outweigh the sacrifices that need to be made.
Yeah, so then 1.4, we're talking about population growth. There are 2 activities here, and you can kind of choose to do which one you would like. This is the more traditional. This is the one that's been on there longer. It's the human population growth. So again, you're making a claim and you're saying the population has gone up on the planet. And so what you're doing here is the students are actually going to look at different countries' data, and they're going to input that into a spreadsheet or into Desmos. It can kind of be either way. And they're going to figure out, so these are those fertility rates that kind of go up, but these are the different countries that we use. And so you can kind of see, and they can kind of make predictions too. If the United States has a fertility rate of 2 and Zimbabwe has a fertility rate of 4, how fast the population is going to increase. The only problem with these numbers is they don't account for loss. They don't account for immigration or emigration. So we have to kind of make sure. So these numbers are going to create really large numbers in the time that you put them on the graph. And so these are the countries.
And you can switch there's a link there to the CIA World Factbook, and you can actually, so if you wanted to select different countries that more reflect your student population and their heritage, you have the ability to do that. I haven't taught this particular lesson in this way. I choose the second option that I'll talk to you about a little bit later. But what I will say is that because this task introduces a new mathematical pattern, and of course, we know that mathematical pattern is exponential growth, and that's what students investigate over the course of this inquiry. One advantage of doing this, if you have students whose mathematical background may be a little bit more limited, one of the advantages here is that you can teach this lesson without using E, right? They can get the idea of exponential growth as time goes by, using generations of time, and generating an equation without Euler's number. So, and there are notes about that, about how to do that effectively. Although it's nice for students to be able to understand what Euler's number means in terms of compounding and that sort of thing, it's not essential to understand the idea about exponential growth that is really the goal of this lesson. And this is what we might call a data mining. This is not an experiment where the students are actually collecting any data. We are using mathematics to generate some data and then explaining why the biology makes sense, or why it makes sense for populations. But there are, of course, lots of limitations Jason mentioned earlier to this data set, or to these data sets. doesn't account for different kinds of loss in populations. But what we're trying to get at here is the fact that when they're uncontrolled or unlimited, populations always grow exponentially. That's the goal of this lesson.
And this is what's accounting for the urbanization of the areas as we see them. So you're kind of linking these things together. And then this also will lead into what we'll talk about in a minute, which is carrying capacity, and like what is the carrying capacity for human beings on our planet? Some people have said it's around 10 billion. And right now we're currently at about 7.8. I haven't checked in about 6 months, but it keeps going up.
Well, I think we
Charlie's-
passed 8 already.
Did we pass 8?
So
Yeah, last year when I did it, it was like 7.8 or something.
what Google says 8.1,
8.1.
according to Worldometer or Worldometer. I don't know what the pronunciation is.
And during the COVID year, I was teaching this, and you actually saw the graph did not stop going up. It went up, but it did lose a teeny tiny bit of up, but not a ton.
Yeah, there was a tiny little blip in the.
Yep. The kids were like, "It should go down, right?" I'm like, "No, it does not go down. It never goes down. It just goes less up."
But it's a good opportunity also to talk about negative growth rates in certain countries. There are a variety of resources that are embedded in that lesson that allow you to have conversations about other topics if you have kind of a tutorial period or a something like that. We have that at our school. But if you choose that you would prefer to do something that's a little bit more place-based and directly connected to a biological system that has the limitations kind of built in, another option is for you to use the option B, which is an investigation of carrying capacity. And it's an investigation of carrying capacity using data that came to us directly from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife about the elk and cougar populations in the Trask unit. So the map that you see there is actually an ODF&W unit map of Northwestern Oregon. And at the time when this task was being developed, I was working in Forest Grove, which is part of the Trask unit. It's not shown on the map there, but it's in between Portland and Tillamook. And so my colleague Joe Masika and I were working with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife rangers for this unit, and they provided us these numbers for elk and cougar populations. And so as a result of, or through this task, what students do is, and by the way, if you're not doing the human population lab or option A that we were talking about earlier, that doesn't mean that we never talk about human populations. There are a series of videos that are incorporated into this task that are specifically about human populations, because we want to make sure that we're making that connection back to urbanization and biodiversity loss. And those kind of lead in, those are the kind of the introductory things that get looked at before investigating the idea of carrying capacity. So we are currently working on and testing a patterns approach or patterns inquiry lab based on these data, but that's not available we're testing it this year. So we're not putting that information into the unit plan just yet. We want to make sure that we test things first with students and see how they work and revise before we put it out to the broader patterns population. But Jason, if you go to the next slide, we can show what the data actually look like. And this is an opportunity. You could graph these data in Desmos, but you have to graph elk and cougar separately. I am pretty good with Desmos, but I'm not a Desmos expert. I'm sure that there's some way to do it with 2 axes, but I have my students look at these graphs of these populations using Google Sheets. And they practice some Google Sheets techniques, including putting two sets of y-axis on, or two y-axes on the same x-axis. So what you have here is population of elk in blue on the left y-axis, and the population of cougars in red on the right y-axis. So if you're not clear about which axis you're looking at, it might seem like the cougar population is actually larger than the elk population, which obviously isn't true because it's the predator. So
Well, one thing that Charlotte did a few weeks ago that I really liked is she had the students take all of these and put them together, and she had the computers next to each other. So you could actually see the graphs sort of build themselves. And so you could do that with either the Chromebooks or some sort of computer system, or even like whiteboards that have these graphs on them, and kind of put them side by side by side.
Yeah, and that's actually what Jason's describing there is part of the thing that we're going to be testing. I'll be testing it this year in the classroom. I had this idea. We've kind of put the idea to paper, but we haven't tested it with kids yet. So
Right.
I'll be testing that later this fall. So a couple of options there for carrying capacity and population growth. I want to take a pause. We're just about halfway through. I want to do a quick check-in, kind of see if anybody has questions or concerns. Susan just posted the link to the Google form again for attendance checking. You want to make sure that you're checking in that way so that you can get your stipend.
Hi, Karen, you have a question? Maybe not.
Okay. You do not need to record your attendance more than once. As long as you recorded it once in the Google form, Lori, that should be enough. Susan's just putting it in multiple times just to make sure that maybe people who missed it the first time have access. Okay.
All right. So the next thing we take a look at is sort of a thing that happened in Yellowstone National Park. If you've never seen the video, I suggest you take a look at it because it's really super interesting, and it was something I didn't know about. So back in the 90s, they went through and they basically got rid of all the wolves. They were kind of worried that the wolves were going to attack human beings, and they just wanted to make it safer at Yellowstone, and so they got rid of, in the early 1900s. That's exactly the same as 1990s. It's almost exactly the same year. But so they removed all the wolves. And so what happened was, not only did like the wolf population just go down because they got rid of them all, but everything else was impacted. So it kind of shows the links between why biodiversity is so important, right? Why you need to have all of these different species, because they depend on each other. And one of the best videos that I saw that sort of explained this was a Bill Nye video where he had a bunch of little blocks, like Jenga blocks, and he was basically pulling out different species one at a time. And then, the first 4, 5, 10, whatever, do a little bit, but it just makes it a little less shaky, get a little bit more shaky. And then over time, it obviously collapses. And that's kind of what this shows. So the elk population goes up right away, and then things like the fish population got impacted, and the soil got impacted. So not only like biotic things, but abiotic things as well were impacted by the fact that these wolves disappeared. And so then it shows the second half of the video is what happened when they put the wolves back. Was that in the 90s? Whenever that was. So when they put the wolves back, all of these populations started to heal themselves. And it's a fairly short video. It doesn't take too long to kind of get through it, but then the kids can sort of say the links between them, which is what's here. And so in watching the video, they kind of create this little diagram here where they kind of put things together. 1995, see? I knew it. Knew it the whole time. All right. But you can kind of see. And so, when I watched this for the first time, it was something that was really surprising to me to sort of see that these things that you wouldn't think would be connected were fully connected to each other. It seems very small to remove one species, but that one species had a huge impact on multiple species.
And this, of course, is the best example of the earlier on. We talked about the introductory biodiversity video where they introduced some ideas about analogies about biodiversity. And one of the examples is, well, if you take my computer off the internet, right, that's not going to have an impact on the big bad internet. But if you take Google out of the picture, right, then there are, lots of other things that are going to happen. So
Sharon, in answer to your question, there is a Spanish folder for each of these units. They are works in progress, so I can't be sure that it's been translated, but most of the stuff that we do is in the process of being translated into Spanish.
I'm checking actually right now for that particular item. Unit 1 got done. Yeah, unit 1. Oh, that's the wrong folder.
We have dual language here at Century High School where I work, and one of the people has been doing all the translation for everything. So I'm assuming that it's there somewhere.
So sorry, let's see. Yeah, Sharon, I just put the link in the chat to the Spanish version of that flowchart. Now, this is a drag and drop version. It's a Google drawing, but I've given students all of the things in boxes and had them actually create the flowchart on their own with nothing filled in. So you can ramp this up or pull all the supports back as you see fit for your students. The standard here says evaluate the claims, evidence, and reasoning that these complex interactions are happening. But really what they're doing here with this particular drag and drop or other form of flow charting really is a model, right? They're modeling the mechanism of the change in the ecosystem. And some of the things, I'll speak for myself, I think some of the things that the NGSS are asking us to model are actually pretty difficult to model. And yet we have a system that is relatively easy to model and for students to model, and yet that's not what's being asked. So I developed this flow chart, and I did that partially because I felt that I didn't have really great opportunities to do modeling as much as the NGSS is asking. So I found an opportunity to do modeling and then decide and thought it would be a great place to put it because it is a relatively easy one for students to get their minds around. Now, there are 2 versions of this Yellowstone task as well. We're starting to get to a point in the patterns biology curriculum where we do have multiple spots in the unit where you may be able to have options. In this case, option 1 is a little bit longer, takes a little bit longer. The students are looking at individual data sets and doing more of that claim, evidence, reasoning type of writing, pulling data directly from the graphs. One thing I think it's great to talk about with kids in this particular case study is that the scientists who actually did all of the ecosystem tracking that is used in this lesson are actually from Oregon State. And so we're able to share with students that it's people from, OSU who did all of the initial data collection about fever colonies and about the aspen trees and the elk population size and the wolves and all of those populations that are tracked in this task were actually, all that data was collected by by researchers from Oregon State. Now, the second option is a little bit shorter. It has a summary video, and then they could probably make the flow diagram from just watching that video, right? I've even used the flow chart like this on a test, giving them the flow chart in advance, and then allowing them different ways to complete the flow chart for different levels of proficiency. I might provide at the lowest level of proficiency, I might provide, a third of the terms, and then all the way up, moving to kids who want to demonstrate the highest level of proficiency. I might not provide them any terms, and they would then develop the whole flow chart on their own.
Do you know,
So-
Charlotte, if the videos are in Spanish?
That's a good question. I don't know. The video that we have used came from the original. This lesson came from PBS originally. And so I think, though, that PBS has now moved all of their content to YouTube. So worst case scenario, you should be able to have Spanish subtitles if there is not a Spanish dubbed version of that. But on YouTube, there should be an automatic auto translate option for at least for subtitles. Yeah, Susan says that the videos that our translators that were hired to do the translations were not able to do that. I'm sure that that is a copyright issue.
Yeah. But being PBS, I was just wondering if they had other versions.
It's possible. Yeah. Sharon says that there might be a toggle for Spanish on the short one. Other questions about Wolves of Yellowstone? Thanks, Doug, for your comment earlier. I think that it's just an amazing opportunity for kids to see something, a real situation and the dramatic shift that occurred. I just went to Yellowstone for the first time in 30 years, this summer, 35 years. I had gone when I was a teenager. We had driven from Virginia all the way to Yellowstone. And that was in 1988. Some of you may remember that was the year that the fires came through. And so the last time I had seen Yellowstone prior to this summer was before the reintroduction of the wolf. And I'm going to have to go back and take a look the next time I go to my parents' house and look at my mother's photo album from that trip in 1988 to see what it looked like then. I don't have as clear a picture. Obviously, it's a long time ago. But it was an amazing experience for me to go this summer after having taught this lesson for every year for the last 20 years, or some version of this lesson, because it's such a beautiful example of trophic cascade. Anything else on that? One thing I've been toying with in my mind is trying to convert some of those graphs from into Desmos, just playing around with ideas. Anything that we can do to have students practice more with Desmos is good. So I'm just always trying to think about different ways that we can incorporate more practice. So, all right. Doesn't look like there are any more questions about Wolves of Yellowstone. So what we can do now is talk about 1.6. So we got 2 more task sets and then a kind of a reflection. We're kind of zooming through here today, and then we could certainly go back and answer anything else about other topics. So 1.6 is a task set around environmental justice. So if you can just head just to the next slide just for a second. This is a good opportunity to bring back to the forefront of our minds the idea that the patterns curriculum is designed around a set of principles They're called the design principles, and you can see them listed here on slide 33. And if you're familiar with these, then you're probably have heard this spiel before. But if you're unfamiliar with the design principles, I really encourage you to read at the least to read the 2-pager that's linked there. It explains a lot about why Patterns approach curricula and tasks are designed the way they are. And one of them has to do with being culturally responsive. And I feel that Jason and I just taught the summer workshop, and I felt like that almost every time we talked about the design principles, culturally responsive came up as part of the discussion. And that's because that is such an important thing to do. And there are so many facets of cultural responsiveness in teaching, and incorporating environmental justice is one of those things. So you can go backwards one slide. So I like this lesson for a bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons I like it is because after a very brief introduction, students actually do most of this lesson based on choice. We know that giving students voice and choice in their educational opportunities allows them to stay more connected to the class and the teacher. I know that when students, in my experience, when students get to choose, they're always happier, right? Not feel like they're having a say in what they're learning. So there are a few videos from which students choose here. One of them is really about a really hyper-local scenario where the Oregon Zoo is actually working with frogs, shuttling the Harborton frog across sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the road that goes between Sauvie Island and the mainland. And when these particular frogs are spawning, I'm not sure if is that the right word for frogs, I'm not sure. But when they are ready to breed, they need to breed across the road from where they're living. And so the zoo actually has a whole set of volunteers, and they shuttle the frogs across the road in buckets. And actually one of our colleagues on the biology council, after learning about this program, actually started to volunteer as a Harborton frog shuttler, and has had really interesting stories to tell us in council meetings about those experiences. But that's just one example of a conservation strategy that is hyper local, that is highlighted in this task set. There is also, we've tried to identify things that are happening and incorporate videos and choice in from around the world. And so I like to tell my students, if they have the superpower of being bilingual in Spanish or bilingual at all, one of the videos here is actually in Spanish, because it's working with conservation and the environmental justice movement in, and I can't remember off the top of my head which country it is. I think it might be Peru. So the students get some choice around videos that we provide them a few examples or encourage them to find their own. Yes. Thank you, Doug. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. They do some reflection in their INB, and then they have to work on sharing, right? So we have incorporated now into the new files access to group sharing suggestions, student talk protocols for you to choose from when you are selecting what kinds of how you want students to share with their group members. And then they go on and then they learn about Robert Bullard, who is the so-called father of environmental justice. We'll define that for you in a sec. And then they read an article, summarize, and then report. Now, Doug, you said in the chat that you think we should include or bring up this Montana case about the state violating young people's rights and lives. I think that is a great idea. I'm going to put that in our council notes to make sure that happens before we get to it in a month or two. So thank you for that idea. That's an excellent one.
And one thing about this unit in general is it starts off sort of doom and gloomy. You know, there's too many people and the carrying capacity can't support us, and animals are losing their biodiversity and other creatures are losing biodiversity. 1.6 and 1.7 kind of talk about what can we do, right? Is there a way that we can actually, negate some of these impacts that we're having? And so that's kind of what I like about this entire curriculum, but like this unit in particular, it ends sort of on an uptick, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. We can do something about it.
Doug, I'm putting that suggestion in right this minute into our notes. So thanks. If you have ideas about how you think we should do that, you can, let's connect by email maybe. We can definitely put it into this 1.6. Now, if you're not familiar with within the environmental justice movement, Jason, you can go to the next slide. EJ, oh, sorry, next one. The EPA has defined environmental justice as, quote, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And if you're, if you have any free time, coming from someone who just started with students today, Robert Bullard wrote a book called Dumping in Dixie. He and that's kind of like spurred this whole movement. There is a youth EJ coalition in Portland that is one of the resources that we suggest that students can take a look at in this task set. But I think that, as Jason said, it really gives this opportunity. It's an opportunity for students to see what can happen if they, if they're willing to put themselves out there for that. Yes, will do. I'll find a link for it. So Jason, do you want to go ahead and do the next?
Yeah. And I was going to say too, that this is, something that's on our evaluation. So as a teacher, looking at trying to make yourself more culturally responsive was always something that was pretty daunting. And so I like that we include that, right? It's one of the lenses we look through to make sure that you have the resources you need to be culturally responsive. Sometimes it's very difficult to do that as a white teacher in a school, right? So how do I do that? I can use other sources like this. Yeah, so this is the sort of the question that you're asking students, or kind of why we're doing this. How does this topic pertain to the teaching of biodiversity in a biology course? You could argue that some of this cultural responsive stuff and social justice and all of that is not biology, but the way that we sort of entwine it is to be culturally responsive and to be, social, to, be pioneers of the social justice and making sure that we understand how to give that information to kids.
Do any of you have any examples of how students have felt empowered by what they see in that task set? I'm just curious. I don't want to put anything on the spot, but if you have anecdotes from the ground, we'd love to hear about them.
And you can kind of see, Doug kind of made it as an example. If there's something that you do, or there's something that you think that we should include, we're teachers like you. We'd love to hear about it. And as Charlotte just did, we will add it to our stuff and try to move it towards everybody. Chris is swearing on the chat. That's all right though.
Krista, can you give us a little more context? Are these just things that you've discussed as part of this task with kids?
I haven't yet, but I've lived on several tribal areas, and I also do now. But the one I lived in Idaho before I moved to Montana, which that was interesting. You brought that up too, because I left right before that big thing happened. But there's a lot of animosity between the tribal members and the government for putting the dams in, and there's actually a lot of work being done to tear some of those down, and I don't think people are understanding that that's also going to have a negative environmental impact on these species. They seem to think that the salmon and the steelhead are going to come back if they take the dams down, but you know, it's kind of like this you know, this vicious cycle. You do one thing and it's going to impact this other, and there's just there's a lot of layers to it, especially within tribal members. So it's kind of an ongoing debate that I'm kind of watching from afar, since we don't have a dam right here where I'm at, but I am on tribal land. I haven't discussed it yet, but there is a lot of talk about overfishing. Anyway, I haven't gone there in this component yet, but I want to have a better foundational piece first before I go there. So I don't want to do it wrong. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think when you first started talking, well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing. When you first started talking, I immediately thought about the land partnerships tribal history lesson, which is actually incorporated into Unit 6. And that one actually talks about how fishing rights were established, and particularly talks about the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. I'm not sure exactly where you are located. But
we're part of that too, the Siletz. I'm down here by the Siletz.
Yeah. So the CTUIR came to an agreement about water rights, and the way that it's presented. I mean, and I am not Indigenous, I'll say that right, to be very clear. The way I observed that lesson, the way it was written, and with the videos that are incorporated there, it seems that everybody is in agreement about these particular partnerships. And yet we know, as you're mentioning, that behind the scenes, there's still a lot of contention, right, on other topics. And some of that is land use. And so I am hoping that at OSTA, last year at OSTA, I had the chance to meet I went to a session where we met with, or the presenter was one of the tribal members who participated in the writing of lessons, but it wasn't clear which level and whether that person had participated in the science lesson writing or not. I'm hoping that OSTA is going to have an opportunity to work again with some tribal members who participated in that writing of the science lessons, to be able to ask those questions, to see if revisions that incorporate some of these other things are coming. Because I don't feel comfortable as a non-Indigenous person.
Yeah, absolutely. And
listening
that's kind
to
of
what they're
where
saying.
I'm at too. I've always lived on tribal land and I am tribal, but this is not my tribe. So I kind of feel like I'm from an outside tribe talking about what's best for your land. And I'm kind of a stranger in your land because my tribes are East Coast. But it does vary. Like there seems to be more agreements with Oregon than what I saw in Idaho and in Montana. Because I lived in tribal lands in both of those areas too. And it's a lot of politics involved. And there's a lot of animosity, but I that is one thing I really loved about Oregon, is that there seems to be a lot more respect for the sovereignty of the natives. So it's a little easier, but like I said, I still feel like an outsider because it's not my tribe and I don't want to do it wrong. You know, a lot of it's word of mouth and stories from elders, and it doesn't always jive with, so that would be great if OSTA does that. Please let us know, because I want in.
Yeah. I mean, I'll see if I can get a preview from Steve Scannell of what the schedule looks like. It's in Gresham this year, so October, we were just looking at the calendar. I think it's on October 14th. Okay, so anything else? Thanks, Carissa, on that. So one of the things that the students have the opportunity to take a look at when they do this conservation introduction to conservation and environmental justice has to do with solutions that are already existing for biodiversity recovery. And some of you may have seen the video that is linked here on Jason's screen, and it's not a local one, admittedly, but it is a good one. It talks about a bridge that was built in Singapore when there was the BKE is an expressway. BK is the name of the expressway, but the E stands for expressway. So it was a big highway that was built through Singapore, and it actually bisected the rainforest there. That is the ecosystem of Singapore. And so this video shows how this bridge was built to actually connect the two halves of the rainforest to expand the habitat and to not have the species be isolated on either side of this huge expressway. And so they've called it the Eco-Link. And this slide comes right from the student materials. I'm not asking you all to assess the benefits of this habitat corridor, but it's a good opportunity to introduce students to the fact that things are being done to try and conserve biodiversity and improve biodiversity even in urban areas. And then we're able to show them another example of actually habitat corridors that actually exist in Oregon. So this one I'd actually like to show you. It's a little bit of a shorter video. And if you've ever driven down Highway 97 south of Bend, you've driven over the habitat corridor that is represented in this video. So actually, I'm going to need to check first before I do this. Whether I'm not sure whether, I wanted to show, but I'm not sure, Jason, if you clicked on the box for sharing a video when you shared your screen. So anyway, it doesn't really matter. The video is quite short. It comes from Oregon Department of Transportation, as you can see in the label there. And it talks about the advantages of having put this underpass underneath Highway 97 to allow mule deer to migrate, because they have to get back and forth, depending on the season, they have to get back and forth for food, because they are living part of the year in the desert habitat and then part of a year in the Cascades. And so this thing has been in existence for just over 10 years now, but in the first 4 or 5 years, they reduced the number of animal vehicle collisions by something like 90% over what had happened in that area prior to the installation of this underpass. And so we present these two ideas to students as conservation tactics that are being used, and also to kind of prime the pump for them to be able to work on their project, which is the last task of the unit, or the last proposed task of the unit.
Yeah, so this is the last thing that they do in this particular unit. My group, obviously, they take a test also, but this is the major, and I think Charlotte may have mentioned it earlier, but there's usually a hope that we can get some sort of inquiry task in each of these, and then some sort of engineering task. So this is the engineering, the biodiversity lab where they go outside and collect the arthropods. That is the inquiry task. It doesn't work that way for every single unit, but the attempt is being made to have an inquiry and an engineering for every single unit. So this one, what they are doing is they are creating one of those habitat corridors that Charlotte just mentioned for a particular species that lives in the Oregon area. And so what they're trying to do is they use a map builder. It's a Google map builder where they can create this thing, and they have to actually design it. And not only do they have to design it, they have to figure out how much it costs to put it together. and show why it would be beneficial to get these populations. And usually the populations that you're looking at are going to be impacted by something splitting their environment. So what would giving them access to the other side or giving them access to where they used to be able to be going to help them to be successful as a species? And so you can kind of see down here, we have the slides for how that is done. We have the research template, and the kids sort of put this together. And
You could pull, can you back up? Could you pull,
Yeah.
just take a look at, click on the folder of student examples.
Yeah.
So I have students, I love giving this project. Students really get a lot out of it. And so what I have students turn in is a slideshow. You can kind of see that these are all ones that have come, they haven't all come from my class, but just, you could open any one of them. It doesn't really matter. But one of the things that we provide, or that we suggest that you provide, is a slide template, so that students can make sure that they're getting the essential information into their proposal. And you can see this particular student has left all of the has left the notes that say this template has been made for you as a guide. But then they have the opportunity to adapt that template to their own aesthetic, whatever kind of aesthetic that they want to do. This student seems to have chosen peregrine falcon. Birds are kind of a hard type of species to do for this project, because what they have to propose isn't an actual corridor, but they have to propose like a series of nesting areas to make sure that the habitat is not being made too small. And so it's a great opportunity to pull in some of the things and ideas that we admittedly haven't put a huge amount of focus on over the course of the unit, but but that are a little bit more intuitive, like a food web that you saw there a couple of slides ago. And then they go through the process of identifying what the problem is and identifying what their solution is going to be, or the solution that they're proposing. And in this case, you can see that they've identified nesting locations along a roadway. And this actually, I think, oh no, that's on the Willamette. I was going to say, I thought that was on the, no, that's something else. So this student has shown both on the map view and on the satellite view where their locations are. And they have to, as Jason said, build a budget proposal. There are a lot of components. If bird nesting sites are not on the budget proposal template, but if students are proposing to build water access or a bridge or an underpass, or if they're proposing to purchase land and have it restored, those kinds of things are available in the budget. You could also change the budget template to suit the needs of your students. It's a good opportunity also for students to get some feedback about the content of a presentation, like what a presentation is supposed to have in it. I tend to give a lot of feedback about the number of words on slides when they submit this task. Here's an example of what the budget looks like. This is just a screenshot from the template, the budget template. They identify limitations, and then I think that when we're teaching juniors, it's really pretty important that they are getting as much practice as possible working with citations. So that is a component that's really important to me. So I have that definitely in there to make sure that students are being asked to demonstrate where they obtained any outside information that they included.
I think this is really interesting too, because it kind of shows why some of these things aren't being built for every single species on their list, right? They have cost to them. It's when they have to put the money behind it, they start to see this is why we don't have one for that. But
Just I'm actually writing a list of the assessment things I'm adding one slide to the slideshow, but I'm curious, what are those of you who have done the Habitat Corridor project before or are interested in doing it, what comments do you have, questions about that particular project? Again, it's one of those things that takes some time. Some people find that they have to decide between the biodiversity inquiry and this Habitat Corridor project because they are both time consuming. Some schools and school districts are asking that science teachers incorporate one engineering option per semester. You may have the flexibility to decide whether this is going to work for you. Yeah, students go way over budget initially, right? And I think when Doug, when Jesse and I originally were working on the budget for this, we on purpose kind of decided to keep the budget on a lower end to simulate what actually might happen in real life. I mean, I'm not a city planner or a, environmental planner, but I always feel like projects of this nature get a certain amount of kind of startup funds, right? And then they have to figure out how the rest of it's going to get paid for. So I know you're here locally in my area. Beaverton is pretty darn close to about 100,000 people right now. And so we do a quick series of calculations to figure out, well, if you need to raise $10 million, right, it's actually about $10 a person for 10 years. So did I get that right? I think I just did that math wrong. 10. Let me see. No, I did that right. So $10 a person for 10 years, right? And they feel that that is a reasonable amount, right? Instead of, although I have had students propose a bake sale for this type of thing. Not sure that's necessarily going to be, an appropriate thing. Jeff, you are right. It is hard for students to come up with organisms that are threatened, but I would argue that if urbanization continues on the path that it's on, that any organism that lives around here is eventually going to be threatened. And because we're just ending up with pockets and pockets and pockets of tiny habitats, and what the corridors are meant to do is to actually connect those tiny habitats in order to be able to not have those species completely fall apart. But you're right. Yeah, I give them a pretty wide net and suggest that they are making sure that they're using, I mean, they need to be selecting something that lives in the area where they're researching. I don't restrict them to something that's necessarily threatened, because then you get a lot of duplicates. I find that I don't like to read them quite as much if I'm reading about the same organism all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
you do try to limit them to animals that live in our area.
Oh, yes. And I use in the project materials, there are a couple things that they can use to help figure out what kinds of animals they can select from. We use there's a poster called Wildlife of Portland, and they can select, it's all organized by type of animal. We also use the Atlas of Oregon Wildlife, which I have linked here. It's a book. That's a link that's going to send you to purchase that book. If you're lucky, your local library might have a copy or two. Oh, that's interesting. Vehicle collision data from ODOT. Skip, if you could find a link to that and send it to me by email, I would really appreciate that. I'm going to put that on our list.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Doug said something earlier, like, so Doug, how do you have them do the fundraising piece? So is it just an extra slide that you just sort of assume that if they go over budget, they have to create an extra slide? Or do they just have to sort of say it in their presentation?
I'll answer for him because we work on it together. Basically, it's just an extra slide explaining what type of fundraising they would do for the presentation.
And you just anticipate that happening, I assume? So like they're gonna go over, so there's just okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
put it
Sorry,
as
go ahead, Jeff.
options in the process. Like if you go over, this is what you have to do.
I've definitely had students realize that they're going over and then they modify their thing so that they don't have to go back and like figure out the budget part. But they ended up having to go back and editing their whole corridor, whereas they end up, I think, sometimes doing more work because they have to go back and edit to keep it under budget. But I've successfully had students present a wide variety of things, but I think that also gives them an opportunity to take a look at how projects, like how public works projects actually get funded. Right? Put it out to the voters and get a bond, or find very generous billionaires. That's been something that's been suggested in the past. So, oh, thanks, Skip. I'm just writing this in our notes. Can be used. Great, thank you, Skip. I just put both of those into our notes to add in, because that Atlas of Oregon Wildlife is helpful because it actually, every page in that book has a map on it, which shows the date, shows the location of the organism. I also have students use iNaturalist, which is not 100%. Yeah, this is, wow, $74. I don't think I paid that much when I got it.
No,
Oh,
I
it's
can't
actually
imagine.
coming from, oh, but look, it's coming from Amazon Global UK. That's interesting. If you're local and you promise me to get me my copy back, I could lend it to you. But I have students use iNaturalist, and since iNaturalist is crowdsourced, it's not always perfect information. But it gets students to, to interact with their local area, and they can see what they can find things that they might have, so perhaps select something that they might have seen nearby. Emily, that's a good question. There are some choices that you have especially if you're on a time crunch. I work in a school where we are using some different standards because we run the IB middle years program. And so I actually do all of these tasks that we've been talking about today, because I have some requirements around skill-based assessments that I'm required to do. So for me, I'm shooting for 7 weeks this year, which means that I have to cut 2 things or 2 days. Last year it took me about 8. But if you were to make a choice, for example, between the biodiversity lab with the leaf litter and the habitat corridor project at the end, you can probably get it into 6.
And every single one of these units is sort of packed full with lots and lots of stuff. We'd rather give you more than give you less. So there's a lot of stuff. And if you do it all and you do every single piece of it, it could take a long time. I think I've
Thank
done
you.
it in like 10 weeks before, and sometimes I do it in 8 or 7. I've
This
never done
is
6.
this is my first year teaching the biology for patterns. I did physics before, and unit 1, the first year we did it, it took 3 months.
In physics,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a long one.
I mean, and it sometimes you have to embrace the process. I mean, that sounds a little trite, Emily, but at the same time, you're doing something for the first time. You got to give it your best shot. That's never going to be ideal the first time. And I think that most importantly, if you are going, you and your team, I'm not sure where you're located, but you're in Salem. So if you and your team are making decisions about things to include or things to not include, most importantly is that you need to make sure that you're threading together the whole storyline so that by the end, the students can actually have all the tools to be able to answer the unit essential question. One thing that we've noticed, sometimes we get feedback that people say that they don't feel that perhaps that things can get answered super effectively. And then we find out that large pieces have been like, people have sometimes cherry pick, like only do maybe a third of the tasks or, 2/3 of the tasks and are leaving out some big pieces. So if you and your team decide for the sake of time to not do some things, it is important that you provide patterns related support that incorporates some of those ideas, right? And we wouldn't want you to go back and do more or we wouldn't suggest, I would say, it doesn't have to do with what we want. You have to decide with your team, but to not fall back onto lecture-based tasks to fill in the
Yeah.
gaps.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Other thoughts or questions? Jason, I'm feeling good. And the previous webinar, some people here will be able to attest to the fact that I'm like running right up to 5:59 p.m. So feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
I know we have a couple people who needed some work on their checking their access to the restricted folder. So if you are one of those people, make sure you hang out. But we would like also for you, please, in order to fulfill the requirements of the grant, we do need you to fill out a exit survey, which I'm putting into the chat right now. Jason and I will both hang around to answer any questions. And then we are also available by email if you have questions as time goes by. We do both teach full-time. And so just be cognizant of that. We will answer you, but we're balancing this work with our other work. Kim, good question. No, there have been no major updates since last school year. I'm not sure exactly when you arrived. I am working on a populations and carrying capacity I don't want to say adjustment, an alternative that's for populations and carrying capacity that takes those Trask, elk, and cougar data and has students graphing those in Desmos and turn that kind of more into a patterns lab. But I'm testing that this year, and hopefully we'll have some other people from the council testing that, and it will not appear in the curriculum until next year at the earliest.
And it says further questions on there, but also, I mean, if there are things that you have suggestions, please give us those suggestions, right? Send us an email being like, hey, have you tried this? I would love to see some of those.